After action report detailing the Kerensky heat match between Rental and MechWarrior Lincoln. The mission objectives were to capture and hold 3 centrally located buildings denoted by the 36 tiles marked around the captured zones. For each building that a combatant had more units than the opposition on, they would score 5 points, to a maximum of 60 points. Additionally, buildings could be destroyed in order to deny the opponent objective score, as a completely demolished building could not be used to earn points. In addition, it is notable that crippled or immobile units could not be used to score. Combat score would also be awarded based on the number of enemy crippled or destroyed. For Lincoln, this meant 7 points per crippled enemy unit, 12 points per destroyed enemy unit. For Rental, this translated to 6 points for a cripple, 10 points per destroyed. This score would be awarded based on the state of the units at the conclusion of the battle, and would max out at 40 points. The map was a 49 by 24 symmetrical layout, featuring a heavy urban environment with multiple tall buildings and a significant amount of pavement. Due to double-blind rules being in effect, the buildings would make drawing lines of sight difficult until each side had closed in with one another. In addition, the pavement would make high-speed maneuvering a risky prospect, as getting into buildings carried the risk of falling into a deep basement and being crushed shortly thereafter. Lincoln would field a force created by some guy, and it was comprised of Clan Mongoose assets, primarily clan refits of traditional inner sphere designs. Half of the force was made up of an Atlas C2, with significant long-range battery of clan-spec ER large lasers and ER-PPC. A LB-20X twin medium pulse lasers and a Streak SRM-6 more than doubled its close-in damage potential and was only limited by its heat sinking, which would require it to moderate how often it used its large energy weapons when in close in order to stay at a reasonable heat level. The Thunderbolt C provided a solid wall of metal with its standard engine and energy loadout, although it had similar issues with utilizing its own Alpha Strike. The Naja and Royal Zephyr hover tank made a narc pair, with the Zephyr capable of narking the opponents for the Naja to use its missile-heavy loadout on. The ISRMs on the Naja are prototype weapon systems from the early clans, having the same range as clan streaks, but otherwise functioning as normal SRMs. The final portion of the list had a Royal Hermes and a fast recon cavalry point for objective work. The Hermes, capable of extreme speeds with its mask, was able to provide a charge threat with its piloting, and the clan infantry would be able to take cover in buildings and disappear from view, making them difficult to track and kill. In addition, the clan armor of the infantry would ensure that much of the incoming damage was halved, making them even more difficult to deal with. Rental went in with a star created by Clint, which was a clan Wolverine force of primarily Royal Mech variants, with the only clan mech of note being a pulverizer equipped with a number of prototype clan weapons. Like the enhanced PPC, an ER-PPC capable of dealing 12 damage per hit, and improved large lasers, of which the only improvement of note over the standard large lasers was their weight. It would be backed up by a Royal Thunderbolt, a Royal Crab, and a Royal Shadowhawk. These Royal Mechs would all feature veteran pilots, although only the Shadowhawk was particularly well suited to the urban environment, with the Crab unable to fully utilize the range of its lasers, and the Thunderbolt limited from its LRM in most instances. A Royal Oscout rounded out the force, an extremely mobile target well capable of shifting between objectives quickly on a moment's notice. Rental took advantage of the superior mobility of his Oscout by placing it in an elevated position to get an early look at Lincoln's disposition before Lincoln was able to see Rental's deployment. The plan with Lincoln's deployment was to move for the southernmost objective with the bulk of his forces, letting the greater speed of the Hermes gain some points in the central and northern objectives before destroying them to deny score to Rental. The Atlas was placed up north to maximize the amount of the central objective that could be seen and fired upon turn 1, in order to allow for a quick demolition. Round 1 went off as expected, with some intel being gained when the Thunderbolt was spotted on the opposing side. Multiple units put fire into the central objective, razing part of the building immediately, but no shots were traded between units. Round 2 went mostly according to plan, with the Zephyr reaching the southern objective before any of Rental's forces, and the Hermes reaching the central objective. However, a damage miscalculation caused the destruction of the central objective in the firing phase, denying Lincoln the points he could have gained from holding the central objective, as well as disrupting Rental's planning. In round 3, both sides began to make for the southern objective with the majority of their forces, while Lincoln attempted to make up for the error with the central objective by sending the Hermes north. Unfortunately, a failed PSR caused the Hermes to skid into the northern building, damaging it and falling into a level 1 basement. A recoverable move, as this did not cripple the mech, but unfortunate. The Naja would have the more impactful skid, however, as it fell early in its movement and as a result would be unable to make the southern objective in the following turn. Some shots were traded, but little damage resulted from it. Round 4 would see the start of a slugfest at the southern objective that would last the majority of the rest of the match. As it was the easiest to hit, Lincoln would focus on the crab, while Rental prioritized the Naja for destruction. Once again, most shots missed their mark, although the crab managed to score a few good hits against the Thunderbolt, sinking multiple shots into the right torso, and Lincoln's focus on the crab shaved off 2 tons of armor. The Hermes started the process of demolishing the northern building, as the pulverizer had been spotted in round 2 headed towards it. Rental attempted to displace Lincoln from the southern objective in round 5, initiating a charge with the Scout against the Thunderbolt and a DFA by the Shadowhawk against the Naja. The Crab and Royal Thunderbolt score numerous hits against the Clan Thunderbolt and Naja. The Naja and Thunderbolt respond by shooting at the mechs attempting to displace them, which fails to knock over the Scout but does force a PSR on the Shadowhawk, whose failure will end up causing the failure of its DFA. Up north, the overheated Atlas and the Pulverizer take some shots at one another, beginning the long process of chipping through assault armor. In the melee phase, the Scout lands its charge but fails to move the Thunderbolt out of the objective area, actually dominoing into the crab and forcing it to move out of the area. Despite failing the DFA, the Shadowhawk still manages to displace the Naja from the objective, as due to limitations, the simulator automatically selects a hex to move a unit displaced by a failed DFA, instead of allowing Lincoln to select the hex to escape to per page 150 of Total Warfare. The Thunderbolt ends up falling as a result of the charge, and when all is said and done, neither combatant owns the southern or northern objectives. Round 6 sees Lincoln make a critical error, as he turns the cooled down Atlas north to engage the Pulverizer. While this will allow the assault mechs to duke it out, it removes the Atlas from consideration for the southern objective until that fight is concluded. The Hermes makes a dash for the objective building, as the loss of its initiative means it will be unable to escape the line of sight of the Pulverizer without surrendering the northern objective to it. This entrance into a building proves to have a basement, and the light mech falls down into it. Down south, the fight has shifted to the southern extreme of the objective building, and both sides attempt to remove the softer targets from play, with the Thunderbolt and Shadowhawk prioritizing the Zephyr, and the Zephyr and Clan Thunderbolt aiming for the Scout. The Scout comes out only partially damaged, while the Zephyr is immobilized by this attack, preventing it from scoring for the rest of the match. The Naja and Crab continue to strip armor from one another, and up north the Pulverizer tries to kill the Hermes in the building while under fire from both mechs near its position. In the melee phase, the Scout successfully charges the Thunderbolt once more, knocking it into a building and dealing a massive amount of damage. But it cripples itself in the process, resulting in another round with no points scored on the south. Conversely, the Pulverizer targets the building in the north for a kick, destroying the objective and trapping the Hermes in the rubble. Lincoln's initiative victory in round 7 allows him to break line of sight with the Royal Thunderbolt and Crab, letting his damaged mechs have a turn to focus fire on the Shadowhawk. In addition, it allows the Atlas to enter the rear arc of the Pulverizer and take some shots at potentially weaker rear armor. Rental removes his crippled and unable to score Scout from the southern objective and pushes it north toward the Atlas to try and assist the outgunned Pulverizer, who takes damage to his enhanced PPC this round, reducing him to being slightly more lethal than the Crab. In the south, the Shadowhawk destroys 2 of the Clan Thunderbolt's heat sinks, while the Thunderbolt and Naja fail to cripple it, although they are successful in knocking it over with kicks. In round 8, Rental is able to charge the Atlas at a building, presenting a significant threat if the charge lands, as if there is a basement in that building, the Atlas will collapse it and then be buried under the rubble. The Crab rejoins the fray in the south, opening up on the Naja and landing a series of critical hits that damage the mech's leg actuators. The Clan Thunderbolt and Shadowhawk trade shots, and with the assistance from the Naja, the Shadowhawk is destroyed. The Royal Thunderbolt brings its guns to bear on the building the infantry are hiding in, killing almost half the unit's men, but not enough to cripple them. In the north, the Atlas splits fire between the Scout and the Pulverizer, sending cluster and pull shots into the light mech, while a Clan ERPPC and Streak SRM aim for the assault. The Oss Scout is undeterred by this and lands its charge, shoving the Atlas into the building that turned out to have no basement. Other hits land, but only armor damage results, and the melee phase ends with Lincoln having a numbers advantage on the southern objective. This numbers advantage evens out in the heat phase, however, as a final crit by the Shadowhawk had destroyed one more heat sink in the Thunderbolt, putting the mech into a shutdown check, which it promptly failed. As a result, the combatants end round 8 still even on the southern objective, but that will soon change. Rental moves his Thunderbolt immediately to capitalize on the immobile Clan Thunderbolt, while the Naja and Crab face off in the south, and the Pulverizer and Atlas face off in the north. Unwilling to allow the Oss Scout to land the DFA it is now attempting, the Atlas once again puts the bulk of its close-range shots into the light mech, blowing off almost all sections of the mech. The Zephyr manages a single through-armor crit into a Gyro in the Crab, while the Crab and Naja trade shots. The Crab has crippled the Naja, but the Naja manages to get a second crit on the Crab, destroying its Gyro and crippling it as well. Both sides continue to go even on the southern objective due to the infantry and the Thunderbolt. However, aimed shots to the central torso of the Clan Thunderbolt result in an engine explosion that devastates all units within 3 hexes of it. The Naja loses an arm for this, and both the infantry and the hover tank are killed by the blast. The Royal Thunderbolt comes out shaken but with only armor damage, which will allow it to start scoring at the end of the round. After the blast, all mechs on the southern objective are left prone, with the Crab blacking out as a result of the explosions. Up north, the Oss Scout misses its DFA, but the damage from the miss touches off its own engine, resulting in a second explosion that knocks over the Pulverizer. In round 10, Lincoln switches focus to demolition of the southern objective, as Rental's Thunderbolt advances around the building to finish off the crippled Naja. The Atlas attempts to help with its large lasers, splitting fire between the building and the Pulverizer, blocking its path forward. The cluster weapons blow out a significant number of actuators on the Pulverizer, crippling it in the process and knocking it over for a kick. The amount of damage done to the building is insufficient to destroy it, and Rental scores 5 more points, evening up the match. Round 11, Lincoln makes a final attempt to tie up the score, climbing on top of the objective building to collapse it. This is successful, but the fall kills the Naja, and Lincoln does not have enough range damage to knock down the objective without it. Swapping back to secure the last few points he can, Lincoln finishes off the Pulverizer this round. In round 12, Lincoln gets close enough to destroy the southern objective and open up a line of sight on the downed Crab, doing just barely enough damage to raise it. As a result, no more objective points may be scored this match. The game ends 2 rounds later, after the Atlas destroys the Crab and the Thunderbolt ultimately cripples the Atlas. Total score at the end resulted in 60 points for Rental, 20 from objectives, and 40 from combat. Total score at the end resulted in 55 points for Lincoln, 15 from objectives, and 40 from combat. Inattention to the amount of damage going into the buildings on the first turn was an obvious error. Destroying that central building that quickly cost 5 points that would have made the difference between a tie and a victory. The largest tactical error, however, was made in round 6, where the plan to overwhelm Rental on the southern objective with weight of numbers was abandoned, and the Atlas was turned north to engage the Pulverizer. The northern objective was already slated for destruction per the initial game plan, and would have been trivial to accomplish with Hermes. In point of fact, the northern objective was destroyed that very round, so the Atlas had no point to fight over, only combat points that could have been earned just as easily down south with softer targets. At a 3-5 move, the Atlas did not have the speed to loop up north and then return south before the fight was over. However, if the Atlas had moved south, it would have presented an imminent threat to Rental's mechs, being able to bring its guns to bear by round 7, and being able to be on the objective by round 8, assuming that no skids went poorly. It took until round 9 for Rental to break the stalemate on the southern objective without the Atlas in play. With the Atlas, it is entirely conceivable that Rental would have been unable to break the stalemate at all, and possibly have swung the objective back in Lincoln's favor, which would have then potentially netted upwards of 35 points in the best-case scenario. Even if there was some concern about the Hermes being able to destroy the northern objective before Rental could score, there was easily enough time for Lincoln to bring the Atlas's guns to bear on it, ensuring easier demolition. Rental made good use of displacement tactics during the match to try and control the southern objective and break the stalemate. Despite its failure, a success in round 5 would have meant 5 more points early on, and made taking the lead a much simpler task to accomplish. In addition, the charge against the Atlas in round 8 was a lesson in placement of valuable mechs. Though the possibility is low, the potential to have a mech rendered useless with a simple push is almost as bad as being pushed off the board, and awareness should be maintained in urban environments when fast charge units are in play.